Welcome, boys and girls, to our reading lesson for Friday. We are in week 16, day 5. Just as if we were in class together, you will want to have your Robinson Crusoe novel handy. We're going to get started this morning by reading a passage about the weather, specifically the wind. So go ahead and read this passage. You may want to pause the video so that you can read the passage and then get ready to answer the questions. After you have finished reading the passage, we have some questions here to answer. You will see those questions pop up for you to respond. This week for our phonics and word study, we're talking about multisyllabic words, specifically those words that have the VCCV pattern. Remember, that's vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel. We divide these words in between the two consonants. We've also talked about our VCV and VCV patterns. Remember that if you find that vowel, consonant, vowel pattern when you're reading, you divide the word after the first vowel. If it's a long sound you hear, you will divide it after the consonant if you hear a short sound. We have some different words here that have those VCCV patterns and those VCV and VCV patterns. Stay tuned for some of those questions coming your way. This week for our reading lesson, we are reading our novel Robinson Crusoe, and our skill that we are working on is comparing and contrasting. So you will see as we're reading, we may be comparing and contrasting different characters, different stories that we've read, and then we're also taking a look at this journey or the quest that our main character Robinson Crusoe is on, and we're going to be working on summarizing the story events. So let's summarize. What are some of the most important events that occurred in chapter 16 through 18? What was it that Robinson Crusoe built? What unusual occurrence does he survive? What does he discover? And think about how are Matt from our novel The Sign of the Beaver and Robinson Crusoe, how are they alike? And how are they different? Before we read today's chapters, think about those 3 or more items that you use every day. Choose one of those items and tell how you would make it if you were on Robinson Crusoe's island. Could you build this item, or would you have to do without? So in Padlet on Wednesday, you had to write those 3 items that you would need if you were stranded on a desert island. Go ahead and log into Padlet after watching this video and take a look at some of your classmates' responses. They're really good. Today we're going to be taking a look at chapter 19. This chapter is called I Get Ready for Winter. It begins with, I was so much pleased with the valley I had discovered that I spent much of my time there. At last I built me a small summer house close by a grove of orange trees. It was but a little more than a bower, made of the branches of trees. Around it I built a strong fence made of 2 rows of tall stakes with brushwood between. There was no gate in this fence, but only a short ladder, just as my castle. Here I sometimes stayed 2 or 3 nights together. I gathered about 200 clusters of grapes and hung them up to dry. In due time, they made the finest of raisins. I took them down and carried them to my castle. Thus, little by little, I gathered food for winter. I had just finished my bower and was beginning to enjoy myself when the rainy season, or winter, began. Although the winters there were not cold, the rain fell every day and often all the day. What could I do but hurry back to my castle and its dry, warm cave? For weeks I could not stir out without getting wet. My store of food began to grow small. One day, in spite of the rain, I went out and killed a goat. The next day I found a very large turtle among the rocks. This was all good luck, for now I had enough to eat for many a day. My meals were simple and plain. For breakfast, I had a bunch of raisins and a bit of biscuit. For dinner, I had a broiled turtle. I could not have turtle soup, for I had no vessel in which to cook it. For supper, I ate 2 or 3 turtles' eggs. So a bower that he is referring to is a shelter made from vines and trees and branches. It's what he's kind of using as he earlier referred to as his castle. Although I kept close indoors by the rain, I was never idle. Every day I worked at making my cave larger. I dug far in behind the rock and made a fine large room there. Then I made another door or way out, which opened on the outside of my wall. So now I could come into the castle through the cellar or kitchen and without climbing the ladder. This was much handier and easier than any other way, but it did not seem so safe. I feared now that some wild beast might get into my house, and yet the biggest animal I had seen on the island was a goat. Soon after this, I put a roof over my whole enclosure. I took a number of long poles for rafters and laid one end of each on the wall, while the other end leaned against the rocks above the cave. These I covered with boughs of trees, long grass, and other things as I could get. In this way, I made a very good roof that resisted the rain and kept everything dry. My castle was now a very roomy place. It was quite warm and dry, even in the worst of weather. So think about chapter 19 and all that Robinson has done to try to make this makeshift home of his a true castle, someplace that he is probably anticipating being at for a very long time. We have the vocabulary word idle, which means not working, and we've talked about before how important we think it is for Robinson to stay busy on this island, to not be idle, to keep working hard and keep himself busy. I'm thinking of Matt and how he too was alone in his cabin in our story, The Sign of the Beaver, and how he too tried to keep busy to kind of keep that loneliness at bay. Chapter 20 begins and he says, I make me a calendar. It was now just 1 year since I had cast upon this lonely island. Do you wonder how I kept track of the time? I will tell you. Already a year, my goodness. A few days after the shipwreck, it came into my mind that I would lose track of the days and the seasons, for I had neither almanac nor notebook. It would be hard always to remember the days of the week, and I might even forget when it was Sunday. So I set up a large post by my door. At the top of this post, I cut in large letters these words. I came on shore here September 30th, 1659. Every morning I cut a little notch on the side of the post under these words. Every 7th notch was twice as long as the rest, and this showed me that the day was Sunday. Every 30th notch was longer still and broader. This showed me that a full month had gone by. It was thus I made my calendar. One morning I found, on counting up, that there were 365 notches on the post. I knew, therefore, that it was just 1 year since my landing. I kept this day as a solemn fast. I sat in my castle and thought of the goodness of God in thus keeping me alive and safe in the midst of so many perils. I humbled myself and thanked him for his many mercies. For 12 hours I tasted nothing. Then, at last, the sun went down. I ate a biscuit and a bunch of grapes and went to bed. Having now been on the island for a whole year, I had learned that the seasons were not as the same as in England. They were not to be spoken of as spring, summer, autumn, and winter. They were rather to be called the wet season and the dry season. Indeed, there were 2 wet seasons and 2 dry seasons in the year. So think about why it's important for Robinson to keep track of the days and months. And do you remember how Matt kept track of time when he was in his cabin? How is that similar or different to the way Robinson keeps track of his days and months? So the first wet season began about the middle of February and lasted till the middle of April. The first dry season began about the middle of April and lasted till the middle of August. The second wet season began about the middle of August and lasted till the middle of October. The second dry season began about the middle of October and lasted till the middle of February. I could not have kept track of these things so easily if not had it been for my calendar. Just before the first rainy season began, I was one day rummaging around among the shelves in my cave. There I found the little bag that I had brought from the ship with some barley in it, as I've already told you. I lifted it. It was almost empty. I looked inside and saw nothing there but some dust and chaff. The rats had been there and had eaten the grains of barley. But as it was my habit never to waste anything, I thought the bag would be useful for something else. So I took it outside and shook the dust and chaff upon the ground at a sunny place close by the great rock. So why do you think it's so important that Robinson keeps track of those wet and dry seasons with his calendar? What would be important about a wet season? What would be important about a dry season? Think about that one. About a month after this, I saw that something green was starting to grow at that place. I wondered what it was. It could not be grass, for the stalks were larger and stronger. I had forgotten about the barley, but I had took care that nothing should break the stalks down. They grew fast, and were soon as high as my waist. Then I was surprised to see 10 or 12 heads of green barley come out. You cannot think how glad I was. I remembered then how I had shaken the bag of dust and chaff over that very spot. So think about those wet and dry seasons. This might be very important how this barley is growing. But there was another surprise for me. I noticed in the wet ground a little near the rock some other green plants. These were not as tall as the barley stalks, and they did not seem to be the same. I watched them for several days. Then I saw that they were stalks of rice. No doubt some grains of rice had been in the bag with the barley and had fallen out with the dust and chaff. You may be sure that I took good care of my grain. As soon as the barley was ripe, I harvested it. There was only a handful or two, but I put it away where no rats could get to it. I wished to keep it safe and plant it again the next season. I did the same with the rice. There was so little to begin with that it took a long time to grow a big crop. It was not until the fourth harvest that I could keep some of the barley for bread. I found that the best place to plant the grain was not on the hillside, but in a moist spot not far from my summer home. So how is Robinson feeling about these crops that he has grown? Feel good about what he has accomplished, and think about, if it's the fourth season, how long now he has been upon this island. One day, as soon as the wet season was at an end, I made a visit to the country to see how my crops were growing. There I saw something that surprised me. You will remember that the fence I built around my summer house, or bower as I called it was made of 2 rows of tall stalks, with brush between. Well, I now found that the stakes were still green and that the long shoots or twigs were growing from them. Some of these branches were already 2 or 3 feet long. This pleased me very much. I cut and trained the growing branches into just shapes as I wished. They grew very fast, and soon the whole fence was covered with green leaves. Then I trained the long branches toward the top of a pole, which I set up at the center of my bower. In a few months, the whole enclosure was covered with a green roof. You cannot think how beautiful it was. The place was shady and cool, the pleasantest spot one could wish to have. I did not know what kind of tree it was that grew in this wonderful way, but I cut some more stakes of the same sort and carried them home to my castle. I set these stakes in a double row about 20 inches outside my first wall. In a few weeks they began to grow. They grew so fast that in 2 years they covered the whole space in front of my castle. They were not only handsome to look at, but they helped protect my castle. So why do you think it was that Robinson decided to hunt before he started planting these crops? What was his plan there as he was trying to plan maybe for those poorer weather months? What was he trying to do? So think about what we have read so far, what we know so far about Robinson Crusoe. What do you think about him? What is he like? What words or traits would you use to describe him as a character? And is there anything that you would do differently if you were in his shoes? Give that some thought. Your homework is to reread chapters 21 through 24 on your own independently. Read them independently. Reread the chapters that we read today together in this video. And also please remember that your 10-step writing assignment is due. It is due today. You need to submit it on Padlet, or you can K-mail it to your teacher. So make sure that you are submitting that. It is a part of your grade. Also, the questions that you will respond to as part of this video are also a part of your grade. So make sure that you answer all of the questions before this video is complete. Also make sure that you are following your daily plan and that you are accomplishing everything on your to-do list in your OLS. Miss Saminsky, Miss Rendon, and I will be checking the work that you have done today in your OLS. So with that, have a good morning or afternoon, boys and girls, and we will see you back in class on Monday.